She came out of the woods just before sunrise, limping, trembling, her thick fur matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. But what really stopped everyone cold was the way she cried. Not growled, not roared, cried, like a mother in pain. A deep, gut-wrenching sound that felt almost human. Clutched in her massive paws was a small cub, barely moving. Eyes closed, ribs visible beneath thinning fur. Something was terribly wrong. No one knew what to do. You don't just walk up to a bear, especially not a grieving one. But this wasn't a normal moment. She wasn't attacking. She wasn't running. She was pleading, in the only way she knew how. It happened near a quiet village on the edge of a forest in Alaska, a place where nature and people coexist, sometimes uncomfortably. Folks there are used to wildlife, moose wandering through backyards, wolves howling in the distance, even bears showing up at the edge of town now and then. But this was different. Bears don't come to people. They run from them. And they certainly don't bring their dying young right to a man's door. The man's name was Daniel, a wildlife rehabilitator with over 2 decades of experience. Kind, quiet, patient, the kind of person animals just seem to trust. He'd spent his life helping injured creatures recover and return to the wild. Foxes, owls, deer, you name it. But never this. Never a full-grown bear willingly approaching him, with tears in her eyes and a cub in her arms. Daniel had just stepped outside with his morning coffee when he saw her, standing a few feet beyond the fence line. She didn't growl, didn't charge. She just looked at him like she knew he could help. Like somehow, in her wild animal heart, she understood what he was. At first, he froze. Who wouldn't? A bear that size could end him in seconds. But then he saw the cub, saw the way its tiny chest barely moved. Instinct took over. Slowly, carefully, Daniel approached, speaking softly the whole time. No sudden moves, just calm, steady words. "She's not gonna hurt me," he told himself. She wouldn't have come here if she wanted to. Every step was a gamble. Every breath, a prayer. The mother bear didn't budge. She just stayed there, her breathing heavy, eyes locked on Daniel. And then something unbelievable happened. She laid the cub at his feet. Gently, almost like she was handing over something sacred. And then she backed away. Not far, just enough to show she wasn't a threat. But she stayed close, watching every move Daniel made. You could feel it in the air, that fragile thread of trust between a wild animal and a man who just wanted to help. Daniel knelt beside the cub. It was worse than he thought. Malnourished, cold, breathing shallow, but still alive. He didn't have time to think about the risks. He scooped the little one up and whispered to the mother, "I'll do what I can." And just like that, the story began. Over the next few hours, the situation unfolded in ways no one could have predicted. A mother bear pacing outside the rehab center, refusing to leave. A cub fighting for its life under the care of humans. And a man in the middle, torn between fear, awe, and a deep sense of purpose. Word spread fast. Neighbors showed up, silent and respectful, watching from a distance. Some brought blankets. Others brought food or hot tea for Daniel, but no one tried to scare the bear off. Somehow, they all understood this wasn't an invasion. It was a plea for help. And as the hours turned into a day, something incredible started to happen. The cub, against all odds, began to stabilize. Warmth returned to its tiny body. Its breathing evened out. It opened its eyes. Weak, but alive. And the mother, she stayed. All night. All day. Waiting. Watching. Trusting. Daniel had never seen anything like it. None of them had. It was like the invisible line between human and wild had blurred just for a moment. And in that moment, something rare and beautiful unfolded. A story not just about survival, but about trust, compassion, and the quiet ways we're all connected. But then came a new challenge. Because saving the cub was only part of the story, what came next would test Daniel more than anything he'd faced before. How do you care for a wild animal that belongs in the forest, not in a clinic? How do you reunite a mother and her baby without putting them, or yourself, in danger? And perhaps the hardest question of all, what happens when the time comes to let go? This is the story of a man who answered a silent cry for help, of a bear who broke every rule of nature to save her cub, and of the extraordinary bond that formed between them when everything else seemed impossible. What Daniel did next would leave even the most skeptical people speechless. And it all started with a mother's tears. Daniel barely slept that night. He kept checking on the cub every hour, listening to its faint breathing, hoping it would grow stronger. Outside, the mother bear remained just beyond the trees, lying low, her eyes never leaving the building. It was as if she knew her baby was safe there, but that didn't make it any easier for her to wait. By morning, the cub had managed to sit up, weak and wobbly but alert. Daniel couldn't help but smile, though it was a tired one. The hardest part, he thought, was behind them. But he was wrong. The real test hadn't even begun. Just as he was warming up a formula bottle, his phone rang. It was the local wildlife authorities. They'd heard about the incident and were on their way to assess the situation. At first, Daniel didn't think much of it. He figured they'd be concerned about safety or maybe want to check the bear's condition. But the voice on the other end had a tone that made his stomach twist. "She's been flagged before," the officer said. "The mother bear. She's been too close to human settlements. This isn't her first time." Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What are you saying?" he asked carefully. "If she's become habituated to humans," the officer replied, "she may be classified as a public risk. We'll have to consider relocating her, or worse." Daniel knew exactly what that meant. Relocation was a gamble, and sometimes it wasn't even offered. Bears that returned too many times were seen as threats, and threats were dealt with swiftly. He looked out the window. There she was, still watching, still waiting. He couldn't imagine telling her that the cub was safe, only to take her away. Or he couldn't even finish the thought. That bear had trusted him. She'd walked straight into human territory because it was the only chance her baby had. And now that trust could cost her life. The second plot twist wasn't just about survival, it was about consequences. Daniel had less than 24 hours before the team arrived. Maybe less. And now he had to figure out what to do. The cub couldn't be moved yet. It was too weak. But the mother wouldn't survive if she stayed too close. He couldn't explain that to her. Couldn't ask her to understand policies and rules and invisible lines drawn between safe and dangerous. The village, too, had begun to stir with concern. Some locals were worried the bear would wander further into town. A few people talked about calling for backup, maybe even tranquilizers. The situation was slipping fast, and Daniel felt it. Like standing on a cracking sheet of ice with nowhere to step that wouldn't break something. Still, something in him refused to give up. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after the way she'd looked at him that first morning, desperate, vulnerable, hopeful. He made a decision. Risky, maybe reckless, but it was the only shot he had. He'd try to reunite them. Not later. Not when it was safe or easy. Now. But doing it safely would take everything he had. The right timing, the right setting, a quiet moment when the cub could be strong enough to move. even if just for a few minutes, and the mother wouldn't feel threatened. It meant getting help from a small group of people he could trust, and keeping the authorities from interfering before they had a chance to act. He had to walk a tightrope between the law and compassion, between human caution and animal instinct. And if any part of it went wrong, the results could be tragic. So as the sun started to dip again below the trees, and the forest filled with that eerie twilight stillness, Daniel put the cub in a crate lined with blankets, lifted it gently, and began the walk toward the edge of the trees. The mother bear was waiting. But what happened next, he could never have predicted. Because just as he stepped past the fence line, a sound shattered the silence, one that made every hair on his body stand up. Another bear. And this one wasn't here for peace. The story had just taken another turn, and Daniel was caught right in the middle. Daniel froze. The growl that cut through the trees was low and guttural, and it wasn't coming from the mother bear. His eyes darted toward the shadows to his left, where the trees were denser. Then he saw it, another bear, larger and more aggressive looking, stepping into the clearing. Its ears were flat, teeth bared, and it wasn't limping or crying. This one was wild in the truest sense. The mother bear turned sharply, placing herself between Daniel and the threat, her body suddenly tense, shoulders rising. In that moment, she wasn't just a grieving parent, she was a protector. She let out a deep warning huff, the kind that means back off. But the second bear didn't. It stepped closer. Daniel backed away slowly, cradling the crate with the cub, heart racing. He knew enough about bears to understand this wasn't about the cub. The new bear might have wandered in by chance, or maybe it had picked up the scent of food. Whatever the reason, this was no longer just a quiet reunion. This was survival. Before things could spiral, a loud bang echoed through the trees. Not a gunshot. Daniel had warned the locals against bringing weapons, but a car backfiring on the road nearby. The sound startled all three of them. The second bear flinched and turned toward the noise, then disappeared into the woods as quickly as it had come. Silence fell again, heavy and uncertain. The mother bear didn't move for a moment. She just stood there, breathing hard, eyes locked on where the threat had vanished. Then she turned back toward Daniel, slowly. Her muscles relaxed. Her face softened. That's when Daniel made his move. He set the crate down gently and opened it. The cub stirred, lifted its head. Still weak, but curious. Then with wobbling legs, it stepped out. The moment the mother saw her baby move, something shifted in her. A soft grunt escaped her chest, followed by a low, rhythmic sound, like a hum. The cub responded with a tiny whine and stumbled toward her. When they touched noses, Daniel had to turn away. It was too much, too raw, too beautiful. After everything, the desperation, the risk, the waiting, they were finally together again. Daniel stayed at a distance, letting them have their moment. The mother licked her cub gently, checking every inch as if to be sure it was real. And then slowly she looked up at Daniel. There was no way to know what she was thinking. But in that long, quiet stare, something passed between them. Maybe gratitude. Maybe something simpler. Whatever it was, it didn't need words. She turned toward the trees, gave a soft sound, and the cub followed. Stumbling, pausing, but walking. Daniel watched until they were swallowed by the forest. By the time the wildlife officers arrived later that afternoon, the bears were gone. He told them the truth, that the mother had come, that the cub had been treated, and that both had returned to the wild. He didn't mention the second bear. He didn't explain the look in the mother's eyes. Some things, he figured, didn't need to be filed in a report. What mattered was that they'd made it. Against all odds. In the days that followed, Daniel kept scanning the edge of the forest each morning, just in case. but he never saw them again. Still, deep down, he believed she knew what had been done for her, and maybe that was enough. News of the story spread. Not in headlines or breaking news, but through whispers, through shared coffee shop conversations and posts on local forums. People called it a miracle. Some said it was proof that animals understand more than we think. Others saw it as a reminder of how fragile and powerful trust can be. Daniel didn't care much for labels. For him, it was simple. A mother came to him in her darkest moment, and he did what any human should do. He helped. And maybe that's what this story was really about. Not just about a bear or a cub or even danger, but about what can happen when we listen, when we pause, when we see fear and don't meet it with fear in return, but with patience, with kindness. Nature doesn't often knock on our doors, but when it does, it's up to us to choose how we answer. Daniel did, and because of that, a family was made whole again. And somewhere, deep in the quiet heart of the forest, a little bear is still growing, stronger every day. Because once upon a time, its mother believed in something wild and rare. Hope.